Absolutely, and this is just I've something that wanted to talk about in that video was the type of feedback, and I think we generally do this, but I wanted to mention these 3 things about what effective feedback is, and it is kind. I know sometimes it's easy to not be kind, you know, especially when the students are not doing what they're supposed to do, but definitely kind. The specific one is something that I know is one of the most important aspects, and in the video, if you notice, that guy was even asking them, you know, what do you mean? And come and show me. And that's one thing that is really important, you know, saying, I guess it would be saying, you know, oh, well, this doesn't feel right, or the lines don't feel right, and that's, or I said, well, this line goes down here a certain amount, you know, maybe it could go up a centimeter, whatever your, you know, the drawing should be more specific, and that feedback really is helpful. And I think that ties into it. For me, it's the same thing, you know, if I specifically be like, I didn't like it is not okay. I mean, it doesn't help the kids, you know, or you know, right, or you know, or even you know, don't turn your back to the audience. If I don't tell them, you know, when you're at this point, you know, you should be facing this way with, you know, maybe your feet turned out like this, your feet towards the audience. If I don't give them specific feedback, it doesn't make any sense to them. And so the same thing with drawing, you know, I would, especially with what you guys do, specific is important. Even though a lot of times what we deal with is feelings. You know, it's still those with color, and everything is about feeling, and that's what we do. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to do is I want to ask you all 3 of us can do this, is brainstorm what we could do over the 3 weeks we have in April to maybe do 2 or 3 ways that we can maybe modify our feedback that we're given to the students that you can actually kind of take as homework or classwork that you can do in your class. Okay, maybe a little differently than what we're doing. So we can have a discussion about it and figure that out, and I'd love to talk to you about that. So any thoughts or any ideas of something that you're currently doing that you could maybe do differently or give feedback a different way that would allow them, like for example, to help them with their drawings before they get all the way done?
The only thing I can think of at the moment is maybe doing several small drawings for like every day they do. One small drawing that's specifically addressing one issue, you know, like values or shading or, you know, and then that way they sort of are building on that skill continually, and then they can, I suppose, be working at the same time on their larger drawing and their, you know, because a small drawing should only take like 15-20 minutes.
Yeah, that's smart. I mean,
You can do,
check it.
I can do something too, like a blind critique, because kids don't ever want to talk, especially about their own artwork, but you can maybe put a couple on the table and have little cards or something next to it and say, write what is going right, write what's going wrong, and how you would change it specifically. Like, does this need to be darker? Does this need to be lighter? And then that person would get their stuff back with that feedback there on it, so that nobody's actually having to talk, but they're just left on the table, and then at some point in the period, you know, you can write
Kevin Murphy, Karen Porter,
points, I guess.
and Ms.
What's
Miller
good, what's bad, what's good with each work, and then what would you do to make
Kevin
that
Murphy,
happen?
Karen Porter, and Ms. Miller.
that's
Thank
really,
you.
I love both of your ideas.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
I tried to do a midway critique with our last project, and what I found is that I didn't stop them, and I should have just stopped them and said, okay, today's the day, everybody has to do this midway critique.
Right.
But I sort of let them pace themselves, and what ended up happening is that they didn't do it until the very end, until they were finished, and then you know, they still could have gone on, but by that time they were finished with it, they didn't want to work on it anymore. So yeah, like finding a specific, being really specific and intentional.
Yeah, or just say we're going to work on this for 3 class periods, and then we're going to review it, and then continue from there. point that it's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know those are.
But it's really hard for them to talk about their stuff. So and they get embarrassed.
I mean, I love both of the ideas. I love the blind critique. That's really because that gives them a no worry about talking, you know, and then you can give it back to them, you know, separately, you know, so they don't know who you put it in folders, so they know who it was. And then, you know, it's interesting about what you were saying about the midway, because I think in the video, one of the assumptions that made is, I noticed this in the beginning, I've watched it many times now, but he says the boy was willing to do it again. You know, some of our students sometimes are very unwilling, or they'll just quit or give up. And I think the one thing that I've not done is I've never I've never started a project with the expectation that this is what we're going to do. Do you know what I mean? And if that's maybe something that's really important, if we shape and say, just like you said, we're gonna take 3 weeks, and we're gonna go through, and then we're gonna do this blind critique, and then we're gonna do another, you know, each week, or you know, or something like that. Because if you do that from the beginning, at least the expectation then is that way, so they know right away that they're not going to be discouraged by having to start over again, because they know that's what we're going into the project to be like. So I like that. So we have a blind critique. How many times would you do that? I mean, I know exactly what you're saying with something like that.
Like with something like that.
Let me move the camera so I can see, because that's a big.
That's a big.
Those.
That one has different stages, and this is what Morgan's doing in her class. That one, they had to take the picture first. Then they had to draw the grid to enlarge it onto the larger paper. Then they had to draw it. Then they had to shade it. So in that situation, you can actually have a critique for all 4 sections. You can take the picture, have a critique on the picture. Is there enough light? Is there enough shadow? Is there enough wrinkles? Is there blah, 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 blah. Have criteria that they have to meet. Then continue on, maybe in another couple classes, say, okay, is your grid accurate? You know, do you have as many squares as you need to duplicate that and enlarge it? If that's true, then you can continue. If not, you have to go step back, take a new picture, do a new grid. You know, then is the drawing accurate? Does it match with what's in the grid for the smaller one? Yes. Continue on. No. Go back and fix this, that, or the specific things. Then the shading. You know, is there shading? Is there lights, darks, midtones, highlights, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I mean,
so that could be a 4-part critique project thing, but that would take like. Yeah, I mean, I guess it would have. You could do it on a daily basis, I guess, because the pictures only took. You know, that would be a class period probably, and then maybe at the beginning of the class you could critique the pictures.
What I was going to say, is there a way to break it down? Like you mentioned shading.
Yeah.
You were mentioning, right, shading or different parts, because there's a lot going on there in those pictures. I know I moved the camera back away again, but you have a lot going on with shading and shapes. It looks like there is also... Are those squares that they have to...
That's the grid. That's
the grid, so some use the grid. So that would be just too much to ask them to do over and over and over again, because it'd probably take them so long. So how could you break it? Yeah, so
you'd have to break it up in each part. So like break up. So take the picture, look at the pictures. Are they good enough to give you an interesting, composition? Then you can talk about composition, all that kind of stuff. If they're not, take another picture, and then if they're still not, take another picture, So then you'd have to go back with just that step of taking a picture. Then once you get a picture, then you can do the grid. Does the grid match? Because each square has to be, you have to have the right number of squares on the little piece of paper as the big piece of paper, so you can reproduce what's in each square. So does that match? If that matches, yes, continue. If not, go back. So they're not doing the whole thing again. They would just be doing each individual part.
Yeah, so then at that point...
But I guess it could be like the beginning of a period type of thing. Like at the beginning of the period, you'd review what they did last class, I guess.
And then would you have them do the blind critique then would be the way each time?
The blind critique, I would think, would be after they started drawing.
Like with you saying that, I almost feel like I can't do that because we have to watch who's doing it.
See, yeah.
However, you could probably do that a lot if your kids are having, right? I mean, didn't you do that a bunch? So that sounds like it's a really great way to get them to critique, and then, you know, it would be so interesting to see
Until they start
how they start and where they ended up if they had to continually do that critiquing and going over and doing it again until, you know, until it was right. And, you know, it was interesting. They only did 6, so he could have done more, right? I mean, so, I mean, you probably have put a limit on how many times, you know, maybe 3 or maybe 4 or something.
Yeah.
All right, so if you guys could, what I would love to do is when we come back, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll talk to you, just let me know when you, if you could do this, some part of this, even a small part in April, maybe even the blind critique or something where they do it over. I'd love to just be present to watch and to see how it goes and to see what happens, and or maybe even a before and after, you know, if we fix something. And maybe it doesn't even have to be a large project. Maybe they could have a side project where it is something where they could do something, and it could be based on we're gonna do this, you know, 4 times or 5 times, and each time you come in we're gonna do a blind critique, and then you're gonna go and do it again, and we're gonna do another blind critique, and we're gonna see how it turns out from the beginning to the end. You know, and I know, again, like you said, it had to be small enough so they wouldn't feel too overwhelmed with it, you know. But all right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I think you guys are on the ball, and I hope that this helped out, or this was more like for art and is geared towards you guys, and it definitely has made me think about the way I teach and how to change it. I know for me, one of the things I thought about doing was utilizing, because I have some large classes, and I thought if I split up the class to where half of them were doing their shows, or half of them were doing a scene in the beginning, and the other half were put into groups, and they had to go around to the stations where the groups were working, and the groups had to perform for them, and they gave them feedback, and then they had to go back around, and then they switched, and they continuously switched to go to the different ones. And you could even split me. One class could be just dedicated to that half of the group, and then the other class could be the other groups doing it, and then we could perform and see the end result. You know, for me, that would work, you know. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, and just like I said, and after spring break, I'll get with you guys and do it from there. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.